Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm out of time here. It seems so long since we all met before. So welcome to the Cabinet meeting, Thursday, 14th December at 2 p.m. We've got a large number of items for today, so we'll just crack on. Apologies for absence. Everyone is here. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Should we pick that up at that item?
Whatever.
Jerry, can you give any sort of, or should we just do it now?
It can be done at any time, but if members know in advance that they have an interest in a particular item, it would be best if they narrated that now and removed themselves from conversation.
Might as well, Andrew.
Item 10, the Community Learning Development Progress Update in the partners. It refers to include me too, and I've got a family member, daughter, that now works for them part-time. And it's just to clarify, in case there's any, if anyone thinks that there's any conflict of interest, or because it asks us to agree, is it note 3 things, but agree the plan for year 3. I don't know if there's any implications there.
Jerry, are we?
Obviously, depending on what you're being asked to do and the impact it has on the organisation, there's a judgment call to be made, but it sounds to me that you can probably participate in that particular discussion. I don't think that there is a connection, but I don't think it's of sufficient severity to constitute a conflict of interest.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Jerry. So, if we move on to the first substantial item on the agenda, which is item number 3, General Fund Capital Programme, and this report has been taken. Is it by yourself, Margaret? Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Chair. The General Fund Capital report presents the position on expenditure as at the 30th of September this year, and the report shows a shortfall in resource of £238,000, and that equates to 0.5% of the resources available, which is well within our manageable limits. Inflation and other construction market pressures continue to have a significant effect on both the timing and the cost of the capital projects, and this has been reflected in the report. In particular, in sections 9 and 10 of the report, we set out details of various movements in the current year's capital programme, which the Cabinet is invited to approve, and as before, these relate mainly to timing delays. The delays in the programme have resulted in a net decrease in borrowing required for the year of £5.5 million since the last report. And just to reiterate, it's not a saving, as the planned borrowing will just be delayed until next year. But even after these adjustments, the 23-4 capital spending plans are still significantly higher than the level of capital expenditure that the Council typically incurs in a year. So I would say that there is scope for further slippage later in the year, because we still have quite a number of projects that are awaiting tender returns, and of course there's also the potential for weather disruption over the winter period. The position will be reviewed in the coming months, and any further timing changes will be factored into our updated 10-year capital plans, which will be agreed by Council for 24/5 onwards on the 28th of February. And I have to add that, as well as the variations that are listed in the report in front of you, after the report was submitted, we received a request from the Leisure Trust to carry out some gym improvement works at the Foundry, at the same time as some areas of the facility are going to be closed over the festive period and early in the new year for scheduled maintenance. And it makes sense to carry out works when areas are already closed. That's going to minimise disruption for clients, and it won't cost us anything extra, because the cost of the improvements to the gym area are covered within existing capital provisions and by some developer contributions that we've received. So, to allow preparatory work to get underway for this, early discussions and emergency approval were sought from Councillors O'Donnell and Anderson by the Chief Exec of the Leisure Trust. So I would just ask Cabinet to note the report, approve all the various changes that we've listed in the programme, and to homologate the approval of the additional works at the Foundry, which will not result in any extra costs to the Council.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Can I open up to any questions on this? Andrew, would you like to come in? Thanks, Margaret. We know we did have the conversation with Anthony on the trust, and that seems a sensible way forward, so we're comfortable with that. We've had this conversation many times before about slippage of capital programmes. I think as we're going through our planning exercise for the budget next year, we need to be mindful of what capacity we do have for capital versus what we would like to do. But that's something we can pick up at Budget Strategy Group and beyond. But if there are no other comments, are we happy to recommend this report together with the homologation, if that's the correct way to pronounce it, that Margaret noted? Are we happy with that? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. So moving on to the next item of the agenda, which is item 4, Housing Capital Programme, and this is being taken by... Oh, it's Margaret again. Thank you, Margaret.
Yes, the Housing Capital Programme measures the spend again to the 30th of September, and the shortfall that we're looking at the moment is 97,000, which is 1.7% of our available resource, and again, well within our manageable limits. The main movements in the programme again relate to delays, and some of these are linked to revised procurement processes. In addition, you've heard before that some sheltered housing works continue to be delayed because we're still waiting for Scottish Government energy efficiency guidance before we plan the detail of those works, and explanations in more detail for these issues are contained in section 9 of the report. As a consequence of the changes, borrowing has been reduced since the last report by 1.8 million in 23/4, but as I said, for the General Fund, this is just a delay and it will be drawn down in future years as work progresses. So I would ask you to note and approve the changes in the report.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Any comments, questions on this? Similar to capital for the main General Fund, we've got similar issues on housing. And in a sense, it's probably a bit more critical in housing because we do want to accelerate the refurbishment and acceleration of new build where possible. So that is an area that where we're suggesting caution in the General Fund. It's almost the reverse on housing capital, but we've had those discussions previously. So unless there's any other comments on this, can we agree with this report? Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 5, which is summary of departmental charging proposals 24-25, and Margaret's taking us through this as well. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start this one off, but most of the people around the table will be the ones who will answer any in-depth questions on it. So every year, as part of the budget process, all the departments review the charges that they make to the public, and this includes an assessment of any services where there aren't currently any charges being made. Departments are also required to conduct an in-depth review of every service on a rolling 3-year basis, and that involves not just a high-level review of the charge, but an in-depth review which involves benchmarking and consultation with users and so forth. Departments with critical or high-profile charges, though, are expected to review those in as much depth as possible for every year. So the report that we've got here collates all of the detailed proposals from the individual departments, and all of the proposed increases in income have been taken into account as we progress with our 24/5 budget planning process. So we're already aware and are factoring in these increases. The total increase for all departments, excluding the IJB side, is forecast to be just £73,100, so not a huge amount. And most of these charges that aren't set by regulation or are not statutory charges have got a proposed increase of 4.4%, and that was calculated in line with an average of forecast inflation. So the departmental papers provide explanations for any charges where a different approach to this 4.4 general assumption is made. So there are lots and lots of detailed papers attached to this, and we've got representatives from all the different departments either here in person today or online to respond to any questions that you may have. So I would ask you to consider and approve the proposed charges for 24/5, and hopefully if you've got any questions we'll have people who will be able to give you a bit more detailed answers to them.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Any questions? Councillor Devlin.
You know, of increased with 4.4. Does that cover the service, you know, the increase, or is there any service losing money?
The charges that are detailed in the report all explain for each different one. They might have a different policy for how much of their cost they recover. Some of them are designed to recover their full costs. Some of them are designed to just make a small contribution. Others are set to maybe encourage participation or encourage uptake, so the income is not the primary focus. And in all the background to this, it explains which services fall into which category. So the answer to that is sometimes the 4% will be enough to keep them at full recovery. Sometimes it won't, and it will be explained where that is widening the gap or not.
I mean, what stops you increasing it with more than 4.4? I don't mean them all, I mean the ones
simply affordability, because the officers have got to consider whether, if we put it up by, say, 10%, maybe we would end up losing money, because it would mean that a lot less people would use that service. They would be put off, basically, if we put the price up too much. So it's up to individual officers who are familiar with that service to take that view, and they would usually have done a bit of research to back that up.
I'm just worried that, you know, some of the services are getting subsidised out of the general fund because the increase is not enough, basically.
What we've done this year, because we were aware that those sort of concerns were starting to come through, you'll notice that we have started adding in comments in the backup information explaining what percentage of the cost of the service is covered by the charge. You know, it might be 60% or 70% or whatever, and we've added that in. We've begun adding that into the report, and when we come back next year, we'd imagine that more services will have that information in it.
Thanks very much, Councillor Devlin. Was that a question from Councillor Pragnell?
Thank you. This is for the Director of Education. It's in relation to the provision for pupils with additional support needs that reside out of the authority. Obviously, it says in the appendix that this charge is to recover the full cost. Can you go into a bit of detail of how many pupils we actually have who have additional needs that actually reside out with the local authority but are schooled here? It's just, I think people would probably are not necessarily aware of that because we do have such specialist provision here. And I presume that this has been funded by their own local authorities.
Thanks, Councillor Pragnell. I'll try and answer that. So I don't know the exact numbers of pupils from out with the authority that we have at the minute, but it is a very small number. So we do set the charges for all the various provisions that we have, but in reality I think it's probably 3 or 4 children at this point in time.
And our Chief Executive would like to come in.
Council, just to make you aware as well, often children who would come in from out of the authority may be looked after. Children who may be placed, maybe foster placements, for example, in East Remshire, but they're care of another authority, so that would be where that would normally take place.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Just one question about, obviously the key figure is the 4.4% target in terms of, obviously that's our choice here, but elsewhere in Scotland, are you aware of others charging differently, or is there some sort of national agreement on this at all?
No, there's no national agreement. We do informally measure ourselves against other directors of finance, and it's the increases that I'm hearing anecdotally from other directors of finance are pretty close to what we are looking at. We all get the same economic forecasts and have the same sort of expectations about what inflation is going to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Margaret, obviously we should note that the IJB are currently looking at charging for services still, and may come back with amendments to that. Presumably that would be through Cabinet if there is any changes at that point as a separate paper. And I know they're doing a lot of work on that, given the financial pressures they're under. Following on from Councillor Devlin's point, I think this whole debate about recovery of costs and under-recovery or subsidy or whatever you want to call it, I think we do need to have greater transparency on more of some of the more significant items, because it's difficult to know what sort of level of subsidy we are carrying, and are we making explicit decisions, political decisions effectively, that yes, that is the right sort of level of subsidy, and that is in the context of the broader savings challenge that we have, which you know very, very well, across the council. So obviously the time frame you're working hard on getting budgets over the line for February, now is not the time to do that, but I would urge officers to consider what the 3 or 4 key charging areas are in their services, and to have a more in-depth review on the recovery rates and what is our strategy over the mid to near time, 3 to 5 years, to recover those costs, or if not, to have explicit agreement that this is why the subsidy remains, and that there's political agreement behind that. I hope that makes sense. Do I need to clarify that at all? Does that make sense? So with that, can we recommend the paper? Thank you very much. So if we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 6, review of Council's approach to risk appetite, reputational risk specifically, and this is a report by the Chief Executive. Oh, so Jill is going to take the paper. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Good afternoon. While considering the Risk Management Strategy 2023-25 on the 23rd of February 2023, the Cabinet requested that the Audit and Scrutiny Committee reviewed the level of risk appetite assigned to reputational risk, and to consider if this should be revised to reflect any change in circumstances. The term risk appetite describes the attitude towards the amount of risk the Council is prepared to accept in trying to achieve its outcomes. The Council's appetite to risk, as set out in the Risk Management Strategy, is contained within this report. The risk appetite scales range from 1, low risk appetite, to 10, higher willingness to take risks. Guidance for impact and likelihood over the above key areas are provided in Appendix 1 to this report. Risk appetite is about taking long-term, well-thought-through risks where long-term rewards are expected to be greater than any short-term losses. The current risk appetite levels were agreed in February 2023, but given the challenging financial circumstances, the need to meet climate change obligations and other additional statutory or operational requirements, it is inevitable that difficult decisions have had to be made, and this is likely to continue. Given this, it may be that the risk appetite as set out for reputational risk no longer reflects the level of risk likely to be required in order for East Renfrewshire Council to continue to deliver the outcomes which are important to our residents and businesses, and a different risk level should be more appropriate. The Audit and Scrutiny Committee discussed this in September this year and suggested that the level of risk appetite for reputational risk be changed from 1 to 2. And I'd ask the Cabinet to consider this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Has anyone got any questions on this? Jill, I'd just like to come. Thanks for coming back, because we had quite an in-depth discussion offline and online about the whole issue of reputational risk, particularly given the financial climate, and we are, and we did last night, make decisions that no one wants to take but have to take, which has reputational impacts. So it felt to us at this stage in the Cabinet that a reputational risk of 1 was unachievable. And we asked Audit and Scrutiny to have a review of that to say what their recommendations were on this item. So for them to come back with the recommendation of moving it slightly, just to recognise the climate in which we're under, we welcome and support. So thank you very much. I know it seems a long time since we had this discussion, but I welcome the progress that we've made on that. I don't know if you want to say anything, Stephen, or are you happy with it? So are we happy to recommend the report as is? Thank you very much, Joe, for your work. Thank you. So if we can move on to item number 7, which is discretionary housing payment policy, and this report is by Alison Ballingall. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. This report seeks Cabinet approval for the updated discretionary housing payment policy. A discretionary housing payment, or DHP, is an award of additional financial assistance provided to a claimant when a local authority considers that further help with housing costs, which includes rent payments, deposits, advance rental, rent prior to moving in, or removal costs is required. To be eligible, a claimant must be in receipt of housing benefit or housing element of universal credit. Each claim will be considered on an individual case-by-case basis, with the outcome being to ensure a claimant is in receipt of DHP to which they are entitled. Responsibility for DHPs was devolved to the Scottish Government in 2017, and the Scottish Government will allocate funding on an annual basis to each local authority, and local authority have responsibility for the administration of DHPs. There are no significant changes to the policy. It's simply a refresh, as the policy was last updated in 2013. The aim is to provide clarity, and that's really to ensure that those who are eligible for this discretionary support receive the support they're entitled to. I think just something to update on, since the report was written, a consultation was launched by COSLA, really the Scottish DHP guidance. That draft guidance was circulated on the 8th of December, and views are being sought by the 17th of January on that updated guidance. We've only managed to do a very initial review of the guidance at this stage, but it shows that the guidance seems to be based on the existing DHP manual, and that's used by the authorities in England and Wales. So we don't anticipate there being any significant changes to this policy that we've put forward today. However, obviously, if more detailed analysis highlights that there is a change, then we would come back to Cabinet to bring that forward. So in conclusion, Cabinet is asked to approve the updated policy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Alison, and thanks for that additional information, which is news, because it was going to be something I was going to ask about. Have we consulted on this? So that's the process. And just to be clear, it's possible, but not inevitable, that you will have to come back with some edits on this at a later stage as a result of that consultation.
Yeah, that's correct. I think we had to say we've done a very initial review of it, and it does look very similar, but we'd like to do an in-depth analysis. It only came out on Friday, so it's not given us much time.
Of course. Thanks for that clarification. And this paper came out 3-4 weeks ago, whenever Tim's was prepared. Councillor Devlin.
Sorry, page 110, paragraph 22. The welfare contingency fund is £130,000 over 2 years. Additional.
Sorry, I think that's the next item. That's I think I've got another paper coming after this.
I'll get three today
actually. So sorry, it's coming next.
Right, no bother.
Councillor Devlin's brain's going so fast, he's moved ahead of us all. Right.
What's left there?
So is there any questions on this paper from the rest of the... No, we're fine. So are we happy to agree the recommendations in this report? Agreed, and thanks, Alison, for that clarification. That's excellent, thank you. So moving on to Danny's favourite paper, which is item number 8, Welfare Contingency Fund Updates, report by Alison again. Thank you, Alison.
Okay, thank you. The Welfare Reform Contingency Budget was established to support ongoing welfare reform and the transition to universal credit, and it aims to mitigate the impact on our most deprived communities. Services such as the Money Advice and Rights Team, known as MART, Citizens Advice Bureau and Scottish Welfare Fund have been relying on this funding in recent years. and a report is generally brought to Cabinet every 2 years on this topic. This report is to seek Cabinet approval to use resources from the Welfare Reform Contingency Budget in order to support local residents through MARTS, Financial Wellbeing Project, Revenues and Benefits Resiliency, and to support our partners in the local Citizens Advice Bureau. It also seeks agreement of a permanent budget transfer of a proportion of the welfare contingency provision for Scottish Welfare Fund processing. In terms of recommendations, we've asked that Cabinet approves the permanent transfer from Welfare Contingency Budget of £70,000 to the Revenues and Benefits Team for Scottish Welfare Fund processing from the 1st of April 2024, approves the MARTS bid for £79,000 of Welfare Contingency Budget to continue the Financial Wellbeing Project to build community capacity and resilience in the area of financial inclusion by providing a presence in schools for a further 2 years. Considers the East Renfrewshire Citizens Advice Bureau bid for £80,000 to continue to fund one full-time member of staff to undertake all aspects of benefit support work for a further 2 years. Approves that increased resiliency within Revenues and Benefits Team continues through an external contract up to a limit of £50,000 over 2 years, where processing resource can be called off and paid for as required, and notes that all bids for welfare contingency budget are being requested in principle and are subject to budgetary provision being confirmed when the Council sets the 2024-25 and 25-26 budgets early in 2024 and early in 2025. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alison. We should just clarify this paper was edited since first published.
Yes, Chair, we've amended this paper to put in the first recommendation. We believe the first recommendation was going to be picked up in a separate budget paper, but asking for that permanent transfer of £70,000 has now been built into this paper, and we've replaced the versions online. Thank you.
Sorry, just I missed what you said at the end. So it has already been replaced online? Perfect, thank you. Louise, any questions? You had a question.
Just hopefully I've got the right paper this time. Just a question in regards to the fund. It's, you know, there's £130,000 there, and I think it's roughly £105,000 been allocated. It says there total left in welfare fund 25,500. Will that be spent in the financial year?
Maybe ask Margaret to answer that one.
If I can come in this one, the 200,000 is a contingency, and it will be drawn down as services come forward to Cabinet and ask for it to be drawn down. So at the moment, we know looking ahead for the next 2 years that we've got need for 105 a year, as has been set out here. But there is 25 left if services come up against pressures in relation to welfare during the year, and they can draw it down.
So it won't be spent?
It will be spent if there is a need to spend it, and it will be spent only after coming through and asking permission from Cabinet.
That's fine.
Thanks very much, Councillor Devlin. Any other questions? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. It's again to do with numbers, just to clarify something. You talk about prior years, the £200,000 of welfare contingency budget. I'm fully in support of all what happens here with the Citizens Advice and the Money Advice and Rights Team. You can also tell how successful they are. Is it over £5 million of actually being able to help people find? The A, B, C, D and E all are, well, the first floor, sorry, 70,000, 79, 80. If you add that up, I'm actually getting my head round a way over 200,000 in terms of that. And I'm glad to see it, but just to clarify.
The table at paragraph 25 sets out that. There's a table that. The table at paragraph 25 sets it out per year. So we're not overspent in terms of the budget that should be available.
Sorry?
We're not overspent in terms of the budget that should be available, pending the budget process.
The right table. So that table was adjusted, wasn't it?
On page 110, paragraph 25, the table there sets out that we started off with £200,000 available for 24/5, and we're planning to take 70,000 of that and transfer it permanently to the Scottish Welfare Fund line. That will leave £130,000 available for departments to bid into, and the bids that we've got today are for MART, CAB and revenues and benefits, and that comes to 105,500. So there'll be 25,500 left in the pot for 24/5, which is what Councillor Devlin was referring to.
Understood. Thank you, Margaret.
Sorry, I think we might have the old version. Just in case you have the old version, that's still the old version. Sorry, the new version has been replaced online. That's really unhelpful. It's definitely the right version on the online version.
Okay.
That's the one I've got. This is what we like.
Yeah. There's been a bit of version control going on. Rest assured, it does all add up.
It does.
That's the one I have.
That's the right one.
Yeah.
That's the right one.
Thanks, Louise.
Any other questions? So, comment from Councillor Pragnall?
It was just to say that I'm fully supportive of these proposals. I think it's clear from when you're talking to those who work in the Money Advice and Rights team the impact they're making, and also when you talk to Citizens Advice. I think it's clear it's going to be another difficult winter for people, and if we can do anything to support them, then this fund has to work for our residents, and I think both services and revenue and benefits are respected and people do turn to them for help, and it's just trying to get the profile of these services to know that there is a place to turn to. We know sometimes that we can't help, unfortunately, but certainly when I visited CAB and the MART team, they are committed to their jobs and they're committed to getting the best results for our residents. So I thank them for bringing this proposal to us, and I'm happy to support this.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pragnall. I'm going to echo those comments as well. You know, we see that in the data in terms of the impact that our MART team and CAB team are having to our most vulnerable residents in East Renfrewshire, and it's an incredible impact that they have. So we absolutely do support this paper and the work that you're doing to help the most vulnerable in East Renfrewshire. So thank you to everyone involved in this and for making it happen. So with that, can we approve the recommendations in this report? Agreed? Agreed. So thank you very much. Moving on to item number 9, which is Council Tax Discounts, Empty and Second Homes, joint report by Director of Business Operations and Partnerships and Director of Environment. So who's actually, it's Alison that's taking the paper. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. This report seeks Cabinet's approval for changes to council tax charges for empty and second homes and to ensure that all housing resource is maximised in the local area. The Scottish Government's aim is for everyone in Scotland to live in safe, secure, warm homes. They asked for views during 2023 on how taxation can help this. Following the consultation by the Scottish Government, draft regulations allowing 100% premium for second homes, bringing them into line with long-term empty homes, was laid before Scottish Parliament. I had an update this morning that has now been approved, so obviously that's not in the paper, but that has now been approved. East Renfrewshire is one of only a few councils who continue to offer a 10% council tax discount for long-term empty and second homes. Within Scotland there are almost 43,000 long-term empty properties, and there are 124 long-term empty properties in East Renfrewshire and also 64 second homes. Available resources do not currently allow the housing team to dedicate the time required to work with empty homes owners and to encourage them to bring homes back into use. The policy attached to the paper provides full detail on how changes that we're proposing would be applied. In terms of the ask for Cabinet, we're asking Cabinet to note the consultation on changes to council tax, which have now been approved by Scottish Government, and the expected impact on East Renfrewshire Council. Asking for you to agree the proposal to remove the 10% discount for long-term empty and second homes. Agree the proposed proposal to add a premium of up to 100% for long-term empty properties and second homes from 1st of April 2024. As I mentioned, that's now been approved from a legislative point of view. and agree the proposal that an empty homes officer is recruited. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Alison. Any questions on this? Councillor Devlin.
Yes, that potentially there could be a property in that circumstance.
So have we ever, tried to, collect the council tax off of these properties?
We follow all the processes that we can at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, some of them have been lying empty for probably 10, 15 years.
Yeah, we will certainly always bill and attempt to collect. But yeah, there are potentially challenges with the longer term empty properties for exactly those circumstances.
And you mentioned that the officer you're going to employ to, obviously, to try and collect this, council tax, will they be able to look into a long-term void as well?
I think that the officer's role there's an element of council tax, but it's also about looking at why that property is long-term empty. Right. So it's really about encouraging properties back into use for the local community, to understand why is that circumstance arisen, and then what support is potentially required to bring that property back into use. And that's why we're putting that proposal forward, to encourage properties back into use.
Any other, Councillor Brown.
On the empty homes officer, I completely agree with this. Do we have any stretched aims or targets for the amount of houses we're wanting to kind of be reoccupied and back into the community?
Not yet, because we need to understand, because we haven't done the work. So, for example, if there are 120 empty homes, we don't know whether this constitutes 120 people that are willing to sell but unable to go through the process, or unwilling to sell, or whether half of the empty homes have owners that have absconded and we don't know where they are. So until we do some work and assess the detail, we wouldn't be able to put a target in place.
Any other questions? Just a couple of comments from myself, Alison. Thanks for bringing this paper through. It's hot off the press in terms of the legislation, but there has been a lot of discussion at COSLA on this, and I've been part of that as well. So it's got huge support, unanimous support from COSLA to make this happen. Really encouraged to see that there will be an officer to try to bring long-term voids and empty properties back into occupation. We all know the homelessness issue we've got, and the fewer void properties there are, the better for everyone. So this is very encouraging. Obviously, we're going to learn through the year how this process works. We can't predict everything, and I'm sure there'll be adjustments and amendments to the policy as you learn more how it works and any sort of problems that you face through that. So really welcome you bringing this so quickly once legislation has been approved literally yesterday in preparation for April next year. So well done on that. So thank you very much. So with that, can we approve the recommendations in this report? Agreed. Thank you very much. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is Community Learning and Development, item number 10, Community Learning and Development Progress Update. And is Jamie taking this paper? Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. The purpose of the report before you is to advise Cabinet of the positive impact of Year 1 and 2 of the 21 to 2024 Community Learning and Development Plan. Also seeks approval for the Year 3 plan, sets out the timeline for developing the 24 to 27 plan, and also advises Cabinet of the output from Education Scotland's recent progress visit. Councillors will recall that CLD covers youth work, adult learning and support for local community groups, and the partnership covers council, public services and community partners. They will see at Annex 1 the impact of CLD's response and recovery work, including engagement levels, diversionary work, equality and equity work, digital inclusion, health and wellbeing, early years and volunteering. Members are also being asked to approve the attached Year 3 action plan, and it has a focus on the priorities set out in pages 137 and 138. The plan also gives members a flavour of the breadth and scope of the partnership working that CLD undertakes. We're also asking that you note the work to begin an updated CLD plan for the Scottish Government has just announced an independent review of CLD which may impact on those plans over the coming months. And then finally, the report highlights the very positive finding from Education Scotland's recent progress visit, which gave the authority the highest of 3 ratings and praised that the partnership working, person-centred approaches, progression and quality of universal and targeted programmes, as well as identifying areas of effective practice. So the Cabinet is asked just to note the impact of the recent plans, the Year 3 plan and the findings from the recent inspection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Sorry, I'm just navigating to get to the right page in terms of the recommendations. Bear with me. You got them all. Perfect, thanks. So, can I open up to any questions from members of the public? Members. Councillor Anderson.
It's just, well, a comment really with regards to just particularly pleasing to see within the report where it highlighted the 2 areas that were, doing very well in, and particularly in the youth work in Barrhead and the linking communities as well. But obviously, with the potential issues in Barrhead we've had recently, it shows how important it is, and it's great to see that that's one area where we're really doing very well in. So just a comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on this? Jamie, this is a pretty incredible report. It's amazing to see all of the work that's happening with all our communities across East Renfrewshire, the breadth and depth of the work, and to see it in one paper is sort of eye-watering in terms of the scale of what's going on, and it's really, really pleasing to see. It's a bit of a hidden service. It gets on and does and coordinates with lots of different people, but it's clearly incredibly important in terms of the projects that are being delivered throughout the council area. So please give my thanks to everyone that's working on this and preparing this, and trying to coordinate all of this is an enormous job. So well done. We obviously talked about the inspection report last night at full council. I was very pleased to tell full council, the results of that report, which personally I was delighted on because the service has been under a lot of financial pressure over the last number of years. Hard to keep going, but you have, and you've done exemplary work. So really well done. I do have a couple of very specific questions. One is, and I asked this at COSLA, this multiply success measure, I can't read it, which is, I can't remember which scheme it's part of. Very difficult to measure the success of that. I'm wondering what our outcomes have been on it. So this was an old one, page 146, and it's relating to number of people participating in multiply funded courses. Now I think this is through Michael McKernan's area. It's a very sort of nebulous topic, so I'm wondering where we are on that, and there was substantial money came from the UK government on this, so I'm wondering where we are on results on that. If we don't have the answer now, that'd be great, but it is a question I've had put to COSLA as well, in terms of how effective that is, given that it is quite nebulous. What's the best practice that we're using in order to maximise the benefit of that money? So I'm happy for you to take that away and come back on that if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to dig into the detail of that. The one thing I would just say though is, although that might be one component of a programme that's funded, the broader pieces of the journey that learners are on, of which that might be one critical path. So sometimes programmes in and of themselves may not immediately have an individual impact, but they feed into a longer journey of outcomes for people that can be more transformative over the longer term. So there is an element of caution there that it's not always cleanly that the amount of money invested in a single programme nets out a result in this area. It can be a wee bit more complicated than that, but I'm happy to engage with colleagues and get you that answer.
Thanks very much on that, and I think that was my only comment. So, so with that, are members happy to recommend this report? Agreed. So thank you very much. So if we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 11, Strategic Mid-Year Performance Report 23-24. And this report is given by Jamie again. Thank you, Jamie. And I won't give you as detailed a question this time. But, well, I might.
That's fine.
Just to be awkward.
The purpose of the report in front of members is to present a summary of the Council, HSCP and Trust performance at the mid-year point for 2023-24, using the outcome delivery plan to track progress against our 5 community planning outcomes, as well as key customer staffing and efficiency measures. Members will be aware that some indicators do not have a mid-year update and some have a time lag, so are included in this report where they could not have been reported earlier. Of the 29 indicators being reported with targets, 20, about 70%, were on target, and only 4 are amber and 2 red. I would just highlight briefly some notable positives. Members will note education continue to report excellent attainment levels. We're also seeing leisure centre and library usage levels returning to pre-pandemic states. 42 new affordable homes have been completed, and positive outcomes for victims of domestic abuse. And we're also seeing how our rehabilitation services are enabling people to live at home with reduced support needs. However, we are acutely aware that key challenges remain. So, for example, while our breastfeeding rates are improving, they are still below pre-pandemic levels. Our secondary school inclusions, although well below the national average, have increased slightly and remain a key area of focus for the department. Staff absence rates have increased, which is a national issue for local government, and we're seeing an increase in the number and complexity of complaints that we're receiving. So, against an overall positive picture, some key challenges remain, and services are very much focused on working on those. So Cabinet is invited to scrutinise and comment on the mid-year performance report and complaints report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Councillor Pragnell.
Thank you. It's on the secondary exclusion rate. I recognise that we are performing relatively well against Scottish average, but is this the impact of the pandemic we're now seeing on these children who were absent for certainly a large portion of their education? Is this the children we're seeing now who are maybe experiencing challenging behaviours or actually struggling in the school setting because they weren't used to it? Could you maybe go into detail about that, Mark?
Thank you, Councillor Pragnell. I suppose I'll make a number of observations. Firstly, in terms of the overall figure, you'll see it sitting at 6.7, which is similar to 2018-19, so pre-pandemic, and similar to 2016-17. And whilst we're always wanting to make sure that our exclusions are as low as possible, we talk often about a sort of judicious approach. There does need to be those standards within schools, which I know we've discussed at Education Committee. In terms of the wider piece, in terms of that comparison, nationally it's much higher. I haven't got the breakdown yet for secondary. The latest exclusion information was published on Tuesday, and what I would note was that it was a 40% increase nationally in overall exclusions. Now, they've not broken that down primary to secondary, but I would suspect that the pattern will be similar to ours, where there's very few primary exclusions, the majority are in secondary. So you can see the fact that we've gone from 5.1 to 6.7, that's actually a bit less than a 40% increase, which is the pattern we're seeing nationally. In terms of the wider behaviour, that is something that we've seen. We've reported those statistics through the sort of the JCC, through our health and safety reports. It's probably worth distinguishing there. I would say there's a lot of noise in the system around that, and that, as we've talked about at Education Committee, often there's this idea that there's a lot of additional violence like that, whereas actually within East Renfrewshire, when we look at those statistics, the big increases are in early years and primary, and I do think that relates to your point that that is related to that distressed behaviour, unregulated behaviour that we're seeing. I'm not seeing it particularly in the secondaries, certainly in that overall sort of violent or significant increase in terms of exclusions. It's probably a broader piece, Councillor Pragnell. Hope that helps answer some of those questions.
That was a very full answer. Thank you, Mark. Any other questions on this report? Again, an excellent report. A lot of detail within this. I do have a couple of specific questions. I think one of the things that does pop out at you is the whole attainment gap, which we'll pick up separately in the Education Committee and talk about that regularly, so there's no need to go into any more depth on that here. This is the first time I think Cabinet or Council have seen the revised staff absence numbers, and I know there's been a lot of issues in the collection of that, and obviously there is an increase. So if I could ask Louise, what are we doing about reducing that? Perhaps a little bit about the data collection, what happened there, but more importantly, what are we doing about reducing staff absence over time? And then second question is really on complaints numbers, which have gone up year on year by a pretty significant amount. So I'd like to understand if there's any underlying trends there that we need to be concerned about. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Leader. I'm sure you'll agree our employees are absolutely fundamental to everything we do and deliver, and supporting their wellbeing is key. So absence needs to be considered in the wider round of our people strategy. Absence isn't just one thing. We need to think about all the strands about our employees, including workforce planning and employee development, wellbeing, health, and then absence. Cabinet will recall supporting the creation of a recent budget reserve for employee development and wellbeing, and that underlines that commitment to our employees, who are absolutely the backbone of our services. A health and wellbeing strategy was approved by corporate management team in 2022, and it had 5 pillars to it. So health, financial, working environment, purpose and relationships. So that's all the different components that go into wellbeing. Our annual employee survey asked specific questions about how the organisation could improve employee wellbeing. And while the results were really positive generally, with an overall satisfaction rate of 72.8, staff indicated that addressing issues like workload and working conditions, staffing levels and pay would support their wellbeing. Corporate management team did discuss these absence figures in November. You're right, there was an issue with reporting. That goes back to the implementation of our new HR payroll system and how some of the calculations were set up in that system. So we've had to go back and look at that data very carefully, and that has been audited now and confirmed. What we recognised is, and we need to recognise, is that the trends vary substantially across the range of our services. We've got a very diverse workforce in terms of the types of jobs that they do, and we should have differing expectations of what someone like me, who works in an office every day, will have in terms of absence, compared to someone who's doing manual or care work, often out, doing shift work and working in all weathers. That's very different. And there are a number of services that are undergoing reviews as well, which can also introduce change and result in absences. So it's important that we take time to drill down in each of these areas, working across our departments, and understand that a bit deeper. So what we committed to is that our HR team will go out and work with all the directors about absence in their own individual areas. And we are also working on data dashboards that will give managers access to absence information, real time, so that they can take early action. So there will be a follow-up discussion with corporate management team early in the new year. We will look at targets for the following financial year, and also areas where we might want to consider some more targeted support if we think that would be helpful. I think it's also important to point out that nationally, CIPD, it's reported that absence rates are at a 10-year high, with days lost to sickness absence at the highest rate since 2004. Average absence levels remain higher in the private sector, the public sector, at 10.6 days per employee than other sectors, particularly the private sector, which would sit about 5.8 days. But the upsurge in absence has affected all sectors. The Office for National Statistics points out differences between the public and private sectors that we need to be aware of. So there are very much differences in the types of jobs, and the public sector having higher jobs with higher likelihoods of absence, so care profession, for example. And also workers in the private sector are likely to be paid, less likely to be paid for sickness absence or for that considerably shorter period, which can also have an impact. CIPD also reported earlier this year that staff in the public sector are also more likely to feel exhausted and under excessive pressures at work. so we also need to bear that in mind. And also what is being seen nationally is a sharp rise in people being off with multiple conditions, and we are seeing that in our own workforce. It's not one thing, it's multiple things that are affecting our employees, quite complex caseloads, and our HR teams are having to work really hard over a prolonged period with certain people to support them, and that would be particularly linked to the pandemic, and also perhaps waiting lists that have been longer, or people waiting longer to seek treatment for conditions. So I think that's all relevant as well. Our newly reported absence figures here place us 5th in the country out of 32 for teacher absence, and around mid-table at 16th in the country for local government absence. And our rates per department vary from 4.6 days, and as I say, that's very much an office-based environment, up to 20.7 days in more of a frontline environment as well in our departments. So that's the range of variation we're seeing here in our own council and HSCP. The most common reasons for our absence are stress, non-work related, followed by, though that's hard to define sometimes for people, followed by musculoskeletal, easy for me to say, and colds. But data for 23-24 is indicating that our rates will be up again, and I think that is not just common to, that wouldn't just be our council, that would be all councils. It's what we're hearing across the piece, supporting similar trends, but we're not sure about what that will mean in terms of comparable trends yet. We have demonstrated in the past that where we can take targeted action on absence, we can make a difference. So we will look closely at the reserve I mentioned earlier and where we want to take that targeted action. In 22-23, so sort of last Christmas, HSCP had extreme operational pressures that were caused by high absence levels, and they've taken really targeted action this year to look at that. So weekly absence panels, additional HR resource put in there, training for managers, early intervention discussions, all of these sorts of things, and recent data has shown a significant improvement in their absence in HSCP, which is great. We're also reviewing our absence policy and our procedures. We continue to refer employees to occupational health, to employee counselling. We appointed a health and wellbeing officer earlier this year to deliver actions from the health and wellbeing plan that I mentioned, and to respond to issues out of the staff survey as well. We reintroduced health checks this year for our staff, so in recent months we've done that, particularly targeted at areas which would have had higher absence levels, but also open to all of our staff. As an example, we had 175 staff attended those checks. 5% of them urgently referred to their GP, over a quarter of them referred for further investigation, and over 13% given some lifestyle advice. So it does show the value of reinstituting those checks. Our employees really valued that, and it's really important that we continue to think about things like that as part of our wellbeing strategy. I've covered a lot in this response, so I've hopefully given you a sense of the range of activity that is going on, and it's not just, sorry, I'm nearly done, but I'm trying to give you a flavour of the range of activity and the fact that one simple thing doesn't fix absence, that it will be a range of things over a prolonged period of time, and it depends on what we can invest around them. Around this work, but we can deliver nothing without the commitment and the wellbeing and the resilience of our staff. So I think that's something that, while absence rates are a concern, it's important we consider that in the round against the national trends and also as part of our wider people strategy. So, thank you.
That was an excellent answer. It genuinely was. It put it into context nationally what was going on. And you're quite right to differentiate the different types of workers we have in our organisation. It's a very different profile. The issues at HSCP last Christmas had a profound impact on that service and are well documented, and as you flagged, are under much better control now. Glad to see that the Wellbeing Fund is being utilised for as part. It wasn't just for absence management. Just to be clear, it was at officers' discretion as how best they would use that. But at least there's some resources in there to try to help alleviate this as well as other staff-related issues. So good to see that that's having an impact, and we encourage that. Frankly, we need to see what more we can do and what's possible within our budget constraints on that area. And I think finally, that was a really good example on the preventative health check. It's quite scary, actually, in terms of the amount of people, the urgent referrals and ongoing need, but shows the value of prevention. You know, we're going back to Christie, you know, and all this sort of stuff. This is what we should be doing more broadly as an organisation, and it's good we can do that for our staff. And I'm sure that was warmly welcomed, if not shocked, at a number of the people who participated in that. So that was very, very helpful update. Councillor Anderson would like to.
In relation to absenteeism, and it was a very comprehensive. I think you answered about every single question I could possibly think of there, Louise. But in regards to, I know that a lot of organisations, as a legacy of the pandemic, weren't able to take holidays. Are we encouraging, or do we have, are people allowed to carry over so many and lose them, or where they've got, if we're, you know, an excess, if we're able, obviously, because I realise there's pressures in terms of like not enough staff in particular departments, maybe where folk don't get to take holidays. Obviously, that's an opportunity to get a break, and you know, what's the status there?
Yeah, over the pandemic years, we did see a pressure with people doing a lot of additional hours, a lot of work, evenings, weekends, trying to implement government policy very quickly and keep services running during really difficult circumstances. So over the couple of pandemic years, we did see people carrying quite high annual leave balances forward at certain points, just as we tried to keep things running. But more recently, we've tried to get control of that again, and we shouldn't be seeing that in terms of carrying annual leave balances. We do encourage our staff to take their annual leave. The policy is that people can carry 5 days annual leave without management approval, and they would just routinely do that. But in some cases, you will see some teams agreeing to carry over larger balances if there's been a particular pressure or a particular need. But we really do, or we'll sometimes pay staff in lieu of their leave. But those are quite rare circumstances, and we prefer people to take their leave because we do. People need to get a proper rest, and it's really important that they get to take their leave. So it's not a big problem.
Thanks, Louise.
I think Chief Executive would like to come in with a few comments.
Thank you, Leader. It's just a couple of points you highlighted. First one being in closing the gap, and I know that Mark will ably pick that up at the Education Board. I'm going to say this because I know he won't say it, because he wouldn't want to blow the trumpet, I suppose, of his own service too much. But when we're looking at closing the gap, we have to look beyond just that figure of quintile 1 and quintile 5. Closing the poverty-related attainment gap is actually very easy. You just get those to attain at the top end less well. Gap's closed. What's really important, and what you notice, and is very noticeable about East Renfrewshire's attainment levels, is the children in our least affluent areas attain significantly higher than those who live in similar areas across the country. In fact, it is markedly different. And I think we have to recognise that, and obviously therefore recognise, and I'm sure, I know you do, and I know members do, but it's just to put that on record that it is markedly different, and therefore, of course, we want to close that poverty-related attainment gap. That is our aim, that is a massive focus. But what is really noticeable is that our children and young people who live in less affluent areas actually achieve exceptionally well as a comparator against the rest of the country. So just to make that point, but nevertheless we'll still put pressure on Mark and his team to close the gap even further. And the second point is around complaints. You asked the question about complaints, and if I just maybe address that a little bit. I don't think the number in base complaints is necessarily a figure that is the one you focus on, because complaints can be a good thing. We shouldn't always see complaint as a negative. If you're a learning organisation, you actually take complaints and look at how does that allow you to improve your performance, and how does it allow you to become even better as an organisation. What would be more of a concern to me is when you analyse the complaints and you're getting the same type of complaints time and time again, because then you're not learning from how you're performing. So what is going to be really important, and there are one or two services do this incredibly well, and others will pick up from that learning, is the analysis of complaints and how we use complaints to actually support and embrace the complaints to support the learning of the organisation to allow it to become even better. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And you're absolutely right to highlight, and we did see in Education Committee the outstanding results of St Luke's and Barrhead compared to their comparators, which is way off the scale. So you're right to draw that attention, but we are not going to let Mark off the hook, for sure. But I'm sure on complaints you're not advocating this increasing over time to have more learning experiences.
No, absolutely not. We don't want more complaints, we just learn from them.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, can we go to the recommendations of the report? And are we all agreed on that? So thank you very much. So if I can go to item 12 on the agenda, which is regulation of investigatory powers. And Jerry's taking this paper. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. This report is brought to Cabinet's attention to provide an overview of the Council's surveillance activity during the preceding financial year. It's produced as part of our statutory obligation to bring members up to date on a yearly basis of such activity. The report is for noting. It covers three main areas: the inspection carried out of the Council's business by the regulatory authority in October 2022, the actual activity and use of surveillance during 2022-2023, and an overview of training provided to members of staff during that period. Turning to the first of those matters, the Council was inspected by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office in October 2022. A copy of the outcome of that inspection is attached as an appendix to the report. Generally speaking, the organisation was highly commended. IPCO, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, considered that we operated at a high standard. They commended the quality of training and the authorisations provided by the Council. They noted that all their previous recommendations from prior investigations and inspections had been fulfilled and no further recommendations were made. As I say, the formal inspection report is attached as Appendix 1. We are next due to be inspected round about the tail end of 2025. They operate on a 3-yearly basis. As far as the actual use of surveillance during 2022-23 went, we had one authorisation for surveillance which covered 4 separate targets. The surveillance activity was undertaken in respect of businesses who sold counterfeit goods, operated contrary to trademark, etc. And the actual practice of the surveillance was undertaken on our behalf by Trading Standards Scotland, who operate from premises in Spears Bridge. Despite that fact, we provide the authorisation for them, given that they're operating from within their area. These surveillance activities were online and were therefore conducted from the Spears Bridge area. We did not make use of any what the Act calls covert human intelligence sources. That's effectively an undercover actor who forms relationships to gather information. And these figures across the year represent a drop in the use of covert surveillance from the year before, during which period there were 7 targets investigated under 2 authorisations. As Cabinet will note, we don't use surveillance or covert surveillance to any great degree. The Council's general policy and practice is to make people aware of any monitoring that we will be undertaking, and that takes it out with the categorisation of being covert and requiring authorisation. Finally, in terms of the training provided, we had a change of authorising officers during this period, so training was provided to the new incumbent in that role, who is a head of service within the Education Department, and beyond that, general training was commissioned in June 2022, attended by officers across the Council, both authorisers and people seeking authorisations.
Jerry, thanks very much for that report. Is there any questions on this? No. I'd just like to commend the team. This is, by its very nature, a bit of a hidden activity that goes on in the Council, but a great example of partnership working with police and trading standards to keep our people safe. So thank you for that, and congratulations on such a good report. A lot of work will be done behind the scenes to make this sort of stuff happen, and we appreciate it, and the public will appreciate it in terms of the works to help protect them. So thank you very much for that. So with that, Are we happy with the recommendations in this paper? Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. So moving on to the final item on the agenda, which is item 13, Minute of Joint Consultative Committee, first tier. Held on, no one's, this is just for noting and nothing more than that. So we're comfortable to note that the contents of that minute. So with that, I'd bring the meeting to a close, and I suppose it's appropriate since we're almost at Christmas, although it doesn't quite feel like it. I'd like to wish you all, thanks for all your hard work over the last year, and I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you very much.